Evening. Good evening, everyone. Let's give it another minute, no? What others are trickling in. Okay, sige, we can start, no? Yeah, so this week, no, we're gonna start with, and good evening again, everyone. We're gonna start with Module 2, no? So I hope that most of you or some of you have started Module 2 on Canvas already. Just let me know, no, if my audio is choppy or um, there's something wrong with my controls, no? My audio or video. No? All right. Okay, we're gonna discuss Module 2, but first a few announcements. No? Again, Module 2 is up, including instructions on the dyad or the pair assignment. No? So this class is odd numbered. There's already first dibs. No, there's already a group. No, someone emailed me saying, "Sir, can we be the trio? No, can we be the lone trio group?" So that's already taken. No, so the rest of you, I expect you to have pairs. No? So if you're having difficulty finding a partner, that's understandable. No, please answer the survey I posted last week. No, it's in the announcements. It's in the announcement section. So what I'm gonna do is based on the responses, no, I will then email all who 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 answer the survey, and then you guys choose your diet partner. For this class, I've only received one response, so I'm still waiting, awaiting at least one more response. All right, so the guidelines, please be patient. No, I'm still terms of groupings, in terms of the actual guidelines, what to do. No, I'm still trying to finalize that together with your with Oski, and we're still thinking whether we're integrating it with your management, one of your management major classes. So please bear with us. No? Integration is difficult. No? We've tried this since 2 years ago, but still, because people enrolled in different sections, it can be quite tricky. So let's put it that way. So patience lang. In the next few weeks, we'll send out more guidance on that. Okay. Before Module 2, remember, no, we ended. I didn't want to discuss this last time because I was afraid that not all of you, by last week's session, not all of you were able to finish Module 1. So I think majority, or at least hopefully most of you, were able to finish Module 1, including the final video. No? I was thinking whether to make it optional, but no, I want you guys to really watch it. At least you don't have to watch the entire thing, no? But at least the first 5 or so minutes. No? I found it intriguing, no? When I first came across this. The title is "Why the Poor Don't Deserve Your Pity." No? It's kind of weird. Parang, huh? I thought we were supposed to have sympathy or even empathy. No? So let me ask you now, no? And I'm not posting this just because I want you to have this paradigm. It's also useful. No? On the one hand, yes, I want this to be your philosophy, no? Especially when you're trying down the road, for example, in your career, you do development or you're working in the private sector, that you also want to help out, no, help the poor. No, hope you this mentality, this philosophy sticks to you. No? But apart from that, no, this is actually good advice that will carry us until Module 5, no, for the rest of the course. When we're talking about interventions, no, that are more sustainable, etc., etc. So, with that, I just wanted to hear from a few of you, maybe one or two or even more, no? Kung ganado kayo. What were your key takeaways from that video? That video that says, "Why the poor don't deserve your pity." Anyone? Yes, Francis, go ahead.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, classmates. I get for me personally, my key takeaway or the main highlight of the entire video of Fred Branson talking about his experience in South America is his quote that the main currency that foundations are using is pity, and because of that, instead of making them as passive victims that was at our mercy, we should find meaningful connection with them because they also have something to offer. Sir, you are muted, but
Sorry, I was just thanks for that. Now I was just gonna ask who else wants to chime in, if anyone. Unmute yourself. Just go ahead. Feel free. If anyone else would like to add anything.
Hi, sir.
Anika, go ahead.
Probably like in the Philippine context, I'd like to add something. Kasi when I was in high school, one of my social sciences teacher actually used to be a tour guide for like foreigners who'd go to the Philippines. And then he told a story to us. Now, one of the, instead of like the parang foreigners wanting to tour like yung mga known places in the Philippines, like in Metro Manila specifically, they wanted to see the slum areas po. And parang he was telling us na he found it really parang polarizing na there are foreigners that, yun nga, like there's this perspective na parang they pity the people who and under or like less developed countries. So parang when I think about it now and when I parang relating to the video, it made me realize na, yeah, there's a point here na maybe the foreigners, the way they see us, especially those who are in more developed countries, we're defenseless, we can't care for ourselves, and we have to be taught. But then when you think about it, like those in the slum areas that the foreigners wanted to see before, all of them are striving hard, and all of them have their own parang capabilities and that parang, help them survive from day to day. So it's something I just wanted to share po.
Great. Thanks for that. And I think that adds an element, no? Kasi Fred Branson was talking about communities, no? Perceptions of the non-poor groups to the non-poor. No? Ito naman, country, no? Macro level. That's a good dimension as well, no? That you're adding here, no? Yeah, so both of you are absolutely correct, no? And thank you for sharing that, no? But the point really is not to not have pity, no? It's not saying that you should not have pity, you should not be sympathetic. That's not the point. No? The point is do not stop there. No? They do, of course, no. Contrary to the title, they do deserve pity then. No? But the point is do not stop there. No? Wag lang yung kawawa. No? For example, yung foreigners, no? That's actually common in, let's say, India as well. No? Yung poverty tourism. Many tour operators make money out of that. So the point really is don't see them as helpless. No? They actually have resources. No? They have their own assets, no? And solutions. No? Sometimes they come up with better solutions. No? And the issue really here is it's not so much that they can solve the problems themselves. If you only stop at pity, no, even if you don't intend it to be, no, that creates a power imbalance, and unconsciously sometimes, not intentionally, you actually think that you're better than them. That's the unfortunate implication. No? There becomes that donor ako, I have the resources, ikaw, you're at my whim or beneficiary. Even if you don't intend it, even if you have the best intentions, no? There can be that, oh, I'm the Messiah, I will save you. No? So we want to avoid that messianic trap. The two things that I want you to keep in mind, no, for the rest of the course and throughout your lifetime, no, is when you're engaging with the poor, when you're trying to help out, no, do not think that you're the savior. One, second, go beyond dole outs. No, dole outs have a role. No? For example, especially for disaster relief, kasi yung immediate, no, humanitarian relief goods, ganun. But from a sustainable point of view, no, you have to have solutions that go beyond dole outs. It's more sustainable. No? We'll learn later on, modules 4 and 5, what are some of these more sustainable interventions. And the third one really is how do you empower them? No? Because they themselves are not helpless. So how do you empower them to use what they have? So yun. So throughout this course, no, after we go through some of the metrics, no, which we'll start discussing now, no, we'll start trying to delve into interventions both at the macro level and micro level, no? Especially when we talk about participatory development in module 3, no. You see, no, that it's also important to engage with them, no, and see them not just as mere beneficiaries. And that said, no, there's this added dimension that before we move to module 2 and 3 and beyond, no, I want to use this cartoon strip as a segue. No? Some of you, especially the guys, no, I don't know if some women here graduated from Ateneo Senior High, no, or hindi pa yata during your time. Pwede, no? For those who studied in Ateneo High, no, you might be familiar with the class called Tulong Dulong, no? Yeah, there's another comment here, by the way, no, on the video, and thanks for that. No, before this cartoon strip, no, sir, I said this in the discussion board rin po, but the video made me realize that instead of pitying the poor, we should have conversations with them and engage with them because they also have insights that we can learn from. It's harder said than done, definitely. No? It's easier said than done. But there are organizations that are trying to do that, and it's empowering. Sorry, sir, my mic is not working, but I wanted to share. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Very, very insightful thing. Um, yeah. So, yeah, and it's a good segue to this one, no? And to module 2. No? Yeah, now it's like, oh, you have people that you want to help. There are development challenges, as we discussed in module 1. Those of you who are familiar with Ateneo High, no, there's a class called Tulong Dunong, no, where students, no, get to be sort of immersed, no, para siyang preparatory to your NSTP OSCE engagements, no, where students tutor, no, poorer kids from public schools. No. So if you guys know Meng Digia, no, after I did my Jesuit volunteer year, no, I came back when I was trying to look for a job, no, before I could join government. I did part-time, no. I was a substitute teacher for Tulong Dunong while Meng Digia was on leave. So I'm sure some of you, especially the guys here, know Meng Digia. So I was a substitute teacher for 3 months. But then she came back, then I was offered to teach morality. Parang di ko kaya. I'm not worthy, sabi ko. So yun, I looked for another thing. No? Anyway, so that said, no, there's a famous saying in Tulong Dunong, and this is classic. No, if you're from Ateneo, this is a classic quote, phrase, whatever. The first that it speaks to the first two clips here, no, but we're adding a third one that's really important when we're developing interventions. The first is the old saying where give a man or a woman or a family fish, they will eat for a day. Dole out, diba? Dole out. The second is more empowering, no. You teach them, livelihood, teach them how to fish, no, and they can feed themselves, no? Sustainable, no? So it goes beyond dole out. No? But there's a third one, no? And that's why we are studying poverty metrics, multidimensional, as well as some strategies in later modules. The third one is make sure that whatever intervention you are doing or supporting, is appropriate for them. And going back to the point, si Sophia, Sophia's point was it's about engaging them. Yes, you have to engage them because sometimes, aside from the data that you see, they have their own, they can weigh in on the solutions. So ito, for example lang, the third clip, it's an analogy. What if you want to provide interventions in Baguio City? Do you think teaching them how to fish will solve poverty in Baguio City? Malabo, di ba? So, yun. So, it's not just about trying out interventions and the interventions are more sustainable. It should be appropriate. And that's a good introduction to Module 2 because Module 2 is you're trying to measure, where when we're covering Module 2, wear a doctor's hat, pretend that you are doctors, members of the hospital staff, where we are diagnosing a problem holistically, It's not enough to say kulang sa pera, but what are the different metrics? What are the different indicators of poverty and well-being? And where are the deficits? And then from there, going to this third clip, you can now formulate corresponding activities. The more precise you are, and the more you be specific in terms of diagnosing the issue, the better you can propose solutions. So this is a good segue to Module 2. All right. So Module 2 is all about measuring poverty. The first part, especially the easy part, poverty incidence, etc., that should be, let me just get a laser pointer. That should be easy for you guys. I don't want to duplicate too much, some of what you learned in development economics, no? But we will review that, no? So I will breeze through that, no? Especially the first few ones, no? But to supplement what you've learned in development economics, we will visit, no? Cover some of the more recent trends, no? Which just came out 2 months ago, no? Yung new poverty statistics that came out. No? Some more technical but useful measures like the Foster-Greer-Thorbecke measures, no? More technical measures, no? And we'll discuss other concepts as well, no? Income versus consumption, inequality, self-rated poverty, and we'll have some more additional concepts. No? So to deepen your understanding of poverty. Next week naman, we're still on module 2. No? We will now cover the non-income part. And we can talk more about your assignment next week if you have questions. Because today we're focused on income or monetary measures of poverty. No? Well, how much you earn. Is that enough or not? Next week, yun na yung mga multi-dimensional aspects of poverty. All right. Let me know along the way, no, if you have questions. All right, so we will start with poverty incidence, the most common, the most basic measurement of poverty. All right, so I'll breeze through this. You know this already. No? So poverty rate, incidence, ratio, head count, it's the same banana. They all mean the same thing. It's basically the proportion of people who are poor divided by the total population. So it's in percentage form. So ito, di ba? You know this very well. No? You know this already. No? Basically, there are two lines, no? Two kinds of poverty lines. One is more extreme, which is lower. No? This is the food or the subsistence threshold where it's the income needed, no, for a person not to be considered, well, let me put it in another way. No? It's the income that a person would need or a family would need, no, to satisfy basic nutrition. Food needs lang. Yung mga health education, wala dyan. So it's just the food. If you're earning below that, you are considered extreme poor, no, or food poor. Kasi nga you're under the food. So your income is not even sufficient to meet your dietary needs, your nutritional needs. The second line above that is the poverty line. So it's the minimum income required to satisfy all your basic needs. So food plus. And everyone below that are considered poor. What we call general poor. Kasi just to distinguish that from the food poor or the extreme poor as some consider. So everyone above the poverty line, earning incomes above the poverty line are non-poor, obviously. So itong mga to, no, they are, if you divide them by the total population, subsistence incidence, or the food poor incidence. No? And there's a special category, no, those who are, and we'll go to vulnerability as a concept later. No? Those who are just above the line, no, roughly 100%, 200% of the poverty line, no, are what we call near poor. No? And usually these are vulnerable to sliding kasi ang lapit nila to poverty. And magnitude, obviously, this is the actual number. Number of poor. No? Yung rate kasi incidence, you divide it as a percentage of the total population. So, what are the trends? No? Ito muna. No? So, before the pandemic, no, we'll discuss what happened during the pandemic. No? What happened to poverty? Did it go up? Did it go down? Did it stay the same? We'll discuss that later. No? If you haven't gone through module 2 yet. No? But I think some of you have already finished. No? Great. No? I'll try to post module 3 soon, next week. So, before the pandemic, we were really doing well. No? Especially nung 2015 to 2018, grabe, dramatic drop. No? Even the government's fierce critics, no, like Winnie Monsod, had to congratulate this administration, no, for wow, galing. No? But of course, I would say, no, you can give credit to both administrations, because of course the previous administration did a lot of reforms that started the ball rolling, then continued by this administration. So yeah, good, no, before the before the pandemic. So ito, you see this, no? Poverty and subsistence incidents among the population. Bumagsak talaga. And subsistence almost halved. Galing, di ba? Sabi nga ni Carl Chua, no, and si Secretary Dominguez, we actually we already achieved our PDP target early, no, noong 2018 pa lang, 2020. But then the pandemic happened. We'll discuss that in a while. Just a quick question, no? And this is mathematical, but there's a reason for it as well. No? When you're talking about poverty, no, you can, or subsistence, no, incidents, you can either talk about poverty incidents among individuals, among the 100 plus Filipinos, no, ilang percent doon ng poor, or ilang percent of total families. So it could be individuals or families. So which do you think is higher, no? Is it the incidence among the population? Like, let's say 20 divided by 20% of 100, or a percent of families? Which one will usually result in a higher poverty incidence? Is it among population or among families? Trivia lang. But there's a reason for it. Any takers? Wala? No takers? Just a guess. Which one's higher? Among individuals or population, or among families? Indiv, sir. Bakit, Francis?
Sir, individual, because most of the families from the poverty-stricken population have more children compared to.
Perfect. Perfect. See the chart, no? You'll notice, no? Poverty incidence by population. Wala pala akong families here. Sorry, no? But yes, I thought I pasted it here, no? Anyway, poverty incidence among population, no? You can find it on the PSA website. In both cases, no, poverty and subsistence incidents are higher, no? Because the poor and lower income populations have larger family sizes. So if you do the math, no, ganito lang example, no? So if you're counting people lang, no, there's a non-poor family, no? They have 4 members, no? Parents and 2 kids. No? That's counted as if they're non-poor, no, 0, di ba? Ito naman, there's a family of a poor family, say 10 members. Exage na natin, 10 members. When you're counting them, whether they're poor or non-poor as a family unit, the 10 become 1, the non-poor become 1. Diba? Hindi na 4 versus 10. So natatago, no? It's hidden, no? When you count it by families. No? The 10 now become 1. Sir, question lang, are there gonna be rubrics posted for the DIAD paper? It's posted on the syllabus. Yeah. It's in the syllabus. All the rubrics for all your outputs are in the syllabus. Yeah. So now we discuss, no? Now we discuss the pandemic's effects. So ito, I like this, no? And it's posted on Canvas as well. No? There's a paper by Dr. Celia Reyes, who used to be the president of PIDS, no, Philippine Institute for Development Studies. December to, no? She's a poverty expert as well, and she's the mother, in a sense, no, so to speak, of CBMS. No? That's your DIAD assignment. So the effects of the pandemic. So I want you to look at the left image and the right image. the left image, there are two lines here, no, two trends, no. Kasi what happened was there's a new series and old series. Dr. Celia Reyes was saying they changed the methodology in 2015. So technically speaking, if you change the methodology, you cannot compare the poverty figures in 2015 with the previous ones kasi ibang metric, di ba? Parang weighing scale yan, no? You have a weighing scale that's not calibrated equally, no? Ibang mami-measure mo. So you might be comparing oranges and apples, no? Or apples and oranges. So what she did is, given the data sets, no, she tried to construct the what it would be, no, if computed well, no, the trends using the old methodology, the blue line, and the new methodology. No? Kasi noong 2015, what they started doing, no, mind you, no, you'll see this, you might be wondering, sir, bakit may skip? Why is it every 3 years? Yes, official poverty statistics at the regional and national level, they are, what do you call this? They are measured every 3 years lang through the survey called the Family Income and Expenditure Survey, yung FIES. So what they did, no, before kasi, they have like 40,000 plus, 44,000 dating sample size. No? So they go to that, let's say 2012, no? It's the year 2012. They go to that family and ask questions, no? Only once during the survey year. Starting 2015, what they started doing is they visit the house twice. One around mid-year or after the first 6 months to ask them about their income and expenditure. Kaya nga, FIES, Family Income and Expenditure Survey, to ask them for their income and expenditure for the first 6 months. And then they visit again in the second semester, no? Or right after, no, in January the following year, to ask them about their income and expenditure for the other 6 months naman, for the second semester. And then they average that out. And before, hindi, just once a year. No? So, magkaiba yun because you're taking snapshots and the recall might be different. Kaya may differences in methodology. And that's why we have this. No? So you'll see, maganda na sana. No? And look at this right, the image on the right. What happened to poverty incidence? Poverty incidence went up. Ganda na, no? It was going down. Dramatic, no? Imagine nyo, from 2012 to 2018, in a span of 6 years, almost 10 percentage points or more than 10 percentage points. 1 percentage point is big among population. 1 percentage point is big because that translates to more than 1 million Filipinos. Diba? We are more than 100 million. So any 1% percentage reduction in poverty is lifting at least, no, or more than 1 million Filipinos. Ito naman the opposite, no, because of the pandemic, lockdowns, as we discussed last week, no, or 2 weeks ago, no, yung record high unemployment, record high contraction, poverty went up. So obviously, subsistence incidence also went up. No? I didn't have a chart for families, but you can. I shared the link on Canvas, no, on the PSA website. No? There are statistics also for families. Among the population, poverty increased by 2.6 percentage points, which translates to roughly 3 million Filipinos falling into poverty as a result of the pandemic. Pandemic talaga yon because what accounted for, what are the factors between 2018 and 2021? It's the pandemic. That's the first half, no, by the way. Yun nga sinasabi ko, no, now they do it per semester. Wala pang results yung second semester because the second semester just ended. So hopefully we'll have the second semester data in the next few months. Then they will now take the average, no, for the annual figures. I-average out lang nila. But the initial indication is poverty went up because of the pandemic, unfortunately. Same thing, no? Ito naman yung among families, no? Again, same. It was really going down, no? Even in terms of magnitude, talagang it was going down na, no? Magnitude ito in millions of Filipinos. But again, because of the pandemic, poverty and extreme poverty, no, the food poor, no, subsistence poor went up, as well as the general poor. So that's really the effects of the pandemic. Regional trends. Now, again, we're talking about just the first half, no, of 2021 as compared to the first half of 2018. Again, remember, no, you are also economics majors, so whenever you're comparing, whether that's inflation, GDP, or poverty, it has to be comparing it to the same period. So you cannot compare the first half poverty data with the full year 2018 data. Hindi pwede. It has to be the same, same reference period. Could be the different year, no? But it has to be the same period. Kasi may seasonality. No? Kaya nga GDP, ganun din, no? Same period. No? But they have techniques, no? Especially for GDP, where they can account for seasonality and you can compare it by quarter on quarter. What about regional trends? No? And this came out in December, I think. No? And on Canvas, no? Of course, it's optional. No? I posted a video of their Facebook Live, no? Their press con in December. No? So here, no, most regions saw increases in poverty levels. Most, no, with the Ilocos region, no, really high, no, experiencing almost a doubling of poverty incidents here. No? And only the Cordillera region and the Davao region, or Region 11, had declines. Everyone else, either the same or mostly tumaas. By the way, for those that don't have an asterisk, and you'll learn this in your econometrics class, no? But I think most of you have already had your introductory econometrics classes. No? Usually, you put an asterisk to denote significance, di ba? For statistically significant measures. So itong mga walang asterisk, basically, they're saying the change is not statistically enough because they're within the error margins. Di ba? So NCR, we're not sure what happened. So it's safe to say that it remained the same, as well as ARM and BARM. Because of sa ARM, no, unfortunately, given the small sample sizes, no, sometimes the error margins are quite large. No? The coefficients of variation are quite large. So historically, you see the same trends. No? Historically, poverty rates have been highest in the ARM or the BARM, in Bicol, Eastern Visayas, and usually lowest, no, in NCR. Kita nyo, lowest in NCR and surrounding areas, Region 3 and Region 4A. Ito, 3 and 4A. That's been the trend since before. No? Why? Because economic activity is usually, no, on macro terms, no, are usually concentrated in Metro Manila and the surrounding regions. So Region 3 and 4, the Bulacans, the Rizal, the Laguna, etc., etc. If you follow GDP data, 2/3, no, the share of regions of NCR plus Region 3 and Region 4A in terms of GDP is 2/3. Those three regions alone account for 2/3 of economic output. The rest just make do with the 1/3. They produce 1/3. So it's nice to cover, no, just to see, no, the regional trends. Let me know if you have questions. All right. So let's discuss the threshold. No? What are the new thresholds, no, in 2021? So in 2021, at least for the first half, no, this might be different for the second half, but they will average it out anyway. For a person, no, it's 2,416 per person per month. So less than 100 pesos per day, no, to cover all the basic needs. So that's roughly 15,000 for the first 6 months, or 30K for the year. or 12,000 for a family of 5. I-multiply mo lang naman by 5. Yung poverty threshold. And for a family of 5, it's 70 to 500, just to round it up, for the first 6 months. Oh, as obviously, no, the food and subsistence threshold is much lower, no, so it's 1,679 per person per month, or 10,000 roughly for the first 6 months, or 8,400 per month for a family of 5, and 50K per. Sorry, for the first 6 months, I made a mistake, not per year. I updated an old slide there. I forgot to update this. Yeah. All right, but that's the national poverty threshold. Ito, that's the national one. This one, hindi. What do you call this? The problem is, there are it's not a problem, pero the reality is the poverty lines are different for each region. Kasi nga, you have to account for cost of living differences. No? A poor person in NCR might not necessarily be poor in the province. So cost of living differences. So regional lines differ. No? So for example, NCR, it's 2,770 a month, no, higher than this, no, than the national average, and it's higher than its, a more rural or more less developed region, no? Central Luzon, no? Higher than that. So, yeah, the question I usually ask at this point is this believable? Are these believable? Less than 100 per person to satisfy basic needs. Or mga 50, 60 pesos or less than 60 pesos a day to satisfy food needs. Is that believable? Anyone? What do you think?
No, sir.
Go ahead. Who's speaking? Si Bricks? Is that you, Bricks? Go ahead. Sorry. Can you speak louder?
I believe it's not parang realistic po.
Okay. Why is that?
Since prices are very high, especially today, because of inflation. So 100 pesos per person would not even be enough for one meal po.
Okay. Thank you, Bricks. And Don also said, no, sir.
Yes,
Go
sir.
ahead, Don. You might want to explain yourself.
I think just to add lang po to what he said, he only discussed food, but we also have other basic needs such as yung shelter. So, for example, kung saan po mangungupahan or even kung saan magsistay yung family and other needs, basic needs such as, for me, I think, sir, dapat education na counted and dapat po dun. So, I think 100 is too small or not too realistic pa po.
All right. And it's even less than 100, mind you. All right. Anyone else? Any counter argument? I'm sure, no, some of you are thinking, it's not even enough to buy a coffee in Starbucks. Diba? Wala nang 100 pesos sa Starbucks yata ngayon. At least 100 something. Yeah. So we'll discuss this later again when I discuss the methodology. Yes, it is. I agree with all of you. No? It is hard to believe kasi really. But when we discuss the methodology later on, I would say it's not so much that it's believable. It may be. Go ahead, Joshua. Before I say something, go ahead.
Oh, sir, I think this might be related to what you're about
Go
to
ahead.
discuss.
ahead.
So I remember in the readings it said that they use the provincial prices of, for example, food. So prices in the provinces were often cheaper than in the metro or like that. So that affected also the outcome. That's why it's very low.
Yeah, you're right. No, thanks for reading that article. Yes, they use the prevailing prices where they are trying to measure poverty. No? So kung region ganito, they use the provincial lines or regional lines, no? Regional prices. No? But still, no, even NCR, which has the highest poverty threshold, no, it's still less than 100. NCR na yan, pinakamataas na yan. If you go here, no, that already has the highest threshold. No? So the point I was trying to make, and we'll cover this. Thank you, no, for that. No, but I have a slide later on methodology. No? That's part of it. You are absolutely correct. No? It might be difficult to believe it, but there is credible basis naman and internationally accepted methodology for this. And we'll discuss that later. But remember, no, and I'll emphasize this again later perhaps, no, it's not saying na, oh, once you're earning 2,500, okay ka na. It's trying to set a number that is the very bare minimum. So later, we'll discuss that more later. But first, just to round it out, no, there are also what we call international poverty lines. No? Hindi lang national or regional poverty lines. So whenever you read, no, this is good reference also kasi your MECO students, no, grammar economic subject. So you'll be reading UN, World Bank publications, ADB, etc. Hopefully USAID as well. So there are international poverty lines. No? $1.90 for extreme poverty na yun. That's like the subsistence line, so to speak. And the $3.20 per day. Mind you, it's in dollars, but they are what we call purchasing power parity, PPP. You'll see that a lot, no, when you're reading World Bank and UN publications. It's not the exchange rate, na US peso exchange rate or US rupiah exchange rate, no, when you're talking about Indonesia. No? Ito, no, the PPP concept is, it's very technical, no, when you read the literature, but it can be explained simply lang naman. It's the amount of, let's say, $1.90, no? It's the equivalent price of what you can buy here, no, in the country that costs $1.90 in the US. So it's not the exchange rate. So for example lang, no, with $1.90 you can buy a can of Coke or a bottle of Coke, 500 ml. In the Philippines, a 500 bottle of ml, you can buy that for, let's say, 37.24 pesos. So it's that, no? Hindi yung $1.90 times 50 or 47 or whatnot. It's the equivalent costing of what you can buy in the US, no, for $1.90. The reference is US, but the conversion is not the foreign exchange rate. No? So that's PPP for you. So here, no, I think it's translated to 19.5 or 20 roughly. No? So if you multiply this by that, no, the actual in peso terms, no, $1.90 or 320 per day na PPP terms, no, is this, no, 37.24, very extreme poverty, no, 63 pesos per day. So even lower, no. So internationally, the poverty lines are actually lower pa nga sometimes. So ADB, for example, no, if you use the extreme poverty line, no, they said na noong 2019 less than 3% ang poor. So sometimes it matters the lines that you use, no, kasi obviously a lower line, di ba, the lower number of poor people. So I just wanted you to be cognizant that there are also different poverty lines, no? And these international lines are supposed to be able to compare countries across, no, na apples to apples, no, with the PPP concept. So it's $1.90, not US dollar, but PPP, no, their own equivalent of an item that's worth $1.90 in the US or 3.20. All right, ito. So now we are talking about the methodology, no. I was privileged actually, no, now that I think about it. No, well, remember, no, after I did JVP, I did tulong-dulong. I was a sub teacher for Meng Ligia, si Ma'am Meng. Then I worked for NAPSI, no, National Anti-Poverty Commission, a government entity for 6 years. No? I encourage you guys, no, at least at one point in your life, no, work for government. No? They need good people, no? Well-educated people. But that said, no, I was part of an interagency group called the Technical Committee on Poverty Statistics. No? So I was fortunate to be there. So we had long debates, no. How will you measure this? You know, what kind of menus, etc., etc. So I've seen this firsthand. No? This methodology be constructed, debated, changed even. So up to now, no, they haven't really changed they might tweak it a little bit, no, but in essence, this is in general how they construct the poverty lines. There's what you call, again, as you know, it's the FIES, that's the main data source. It's measured every 3 years. You might be asking, sir, what about, as an aside, no? Might be asking, sir, bakit every 3 years? So what happens in between? Actually, they conduct the annual poverty indicator survey in between. So yung APIS naman, which is what we'll cover and what you've probably seen na in your Canvas course, APIS is done annually, except naman when there's the FIES. So that's really more for the non-income indicators. But they started sometime maybe 10 years ago, they started incorporating income measures there. But it's apples to oranges kasi the questionnaires are much shorter, no, for income and expenditure. So you can't compare it with the triennial FIES official poverty data. No? So going back to how poverty is measured, or the threshold is constructed, there are two components, no? Easily. You have the food and everything else, food and non-food. No? So the food, no, I had a question last night. No? Ito nga I want to repeat it. No? Last night, diba, I teach my econ class on Tuesdays. Sir, kasama ba sa poverty threshold yung utility bills? No? Yeah, we'll get to that later. Theoretically, yes. The answer is yes. Theoretically. So there are two parts, no? The food line, the food component, no? The basket of goods that one person would need to satisfy basic dietary needs, no? Para hindi mamatay or maging malnourished. And of course, on the other side, the non-food component. What is directly estimated is the cost, no, of your basic food needs. So natatawa kami when I was part of that Technical Committee on Poverty Statistics, no, the NSCB, no, the precursor to PSA, no, they were coming out with menus, provincial menus, no, at prevailing provincial prices, no, as mentioned earlier, no. Yan, ay, malunggay this, yung low cost things that would give you the bang for the buck, no, the minimum dietary requirements. And there's an agency, no, just like in the US, no, there's a Philippine agency called FNRI, Food and Nutrition Research Institute, that basically sets the standards. No, you need 1,800 or 2,000 calories, your minimum RDA, dietary needs of this vitamin, mineral, amino acids, protein, whatnot, kailangan yun. So NSCB and FNRI, they were a member as well. No? They were checking whether the menus being constructed by galunggong with malunggay, with rice, no, NFA rice, no, they were seeing whether they already met the dietary requirements. So per day yon, menu per day, then you just multiply it by 365 days. So it's direct estimation. So again, of course, you can argue na, sir, magsasawa naman yun. That's not the point. The point is, you're not saying you should have galunggong and malunggay every day with rice. No? Well, it's healthy, but magsasawa ka. The point is, you need some reference. So at least meron kang credible basis. So for the food part, there is credible basis. I've seen the menus, no. We were laughing kasi ako mataba ako. There's another person in NSCB who was fat, no. He was constructing the menu, so we were joking, kaya ka pala tumaba kasi you tried all the menus. So yun, So the food component of the poverty line is directly estimated. And the menus actually fulfill the basic dietary needs. Ngayon, you're asking me, sir, what about the non-food? Anong kasama sa non-food? Now, here's the challenge. The challenge kasi is, oh sir, kasama ba to? Kasama ba to? People will never agree what to include. Diba? If I ask all of you, no, you'll come up with all of the different basic needs that are non-food. Everyone will have a different idea. Ngayon, kasama ng internet, kasama ng Wi-Fi. I mean, people will have different ideas or perspectives of what basic needs are, non-food. So indirect siya. So what they do is, now they study the consumption patterns of the lower income population. And usually the lowest 30%, no? The poorest 30% in terms of income. Then what they will do, no, is they will examine what's the proportion of food to non-food, no, or food to the total expenditure of that family or that person. And that becomes your ratio. So if food consumption, for example, is 2/3, no, I have a budget, no. Let's say my salary is 30,000 per month, 20,000 goes to food, no? 10,000 yung non-food. Ganun, di ba? So 5,000 divided by x mathematically equals 2/3, no? So what is the total is 7.5. The poverty threshold is 7.5. The non-food is 2.5. So they plug it. So for example, itong food line naman is, yun nga, it's 5,000. The poverty threshold becomes 7.5 because they use this as the reference ratio for the entire population. So it's not, you will say, ay, hindi nga siya believable kasi hindi kasama to, this one. Again, the point is it's hard to believe, but at least there is credible basis. And I've worked with the PSA. They are one of the most credible government agencies. So solid. And this has been subjected to review by international experts in poverty. And they will say that our poverty estimation methodologies are legit, are sound. Again, the point is it's not supposed to be prescriptive. Now you should only be living on this, on 2,000 plus a month, no? It's not that. It's just trying to establish a bare minimum. It's not saying that once you hit that you're rich, no, or you're well off. No, it's just a reference point that tries to at least have a sense of the bare minimum. Okay, just let me know if you have questions. So theoretically, dapat kasama yung utilities, health, etc., etc. Your other basic needs. Sine, well, not necessarily basic needs. All right, let's go more technical. No? Internationally, this is also used, no? But the PSA actually, they come out with these measures. No? Collectively, they're known as Foster, Greer, and Thorbecke measures, FGT. Sila yung inventors. So, again, this pertains to the first semester poverty data for both 2018 and 2021. This is on Canvas as well. No? We'll go into the formula later on. Income gap, poverty gap, and squared poverty gap. So we'll discuss each. No? All right, you guys are familiar na naman with these notations because you took up stat and basic econometrics na yata. No? If I'm not mistaken. No? But despite it looks, for a lay person it looks daunting, no? Pero nakakasindak, but it's actually easy lang, no? If you explain it. So basically here, what you're trying to do is you measure the average shortfall of the poor, no, from the poverty threshold. So you add up all, for each poor family or poor person, no, you compute how much their incomes are far from the poverty threshold. Then you add them all up and you divide it by the total number of poor to get the average. Kasi average lang naman is dividing by the population you're interested in. So add up all the shortfalls, how far their incomes are to the poverty threshold, divided by the total number of poor people or poor families. Then you have the income gap. The average shortfall of the poor population as a proportion of the poverty threshold. So dinidivide mo yan. So it comes in a ratio or a percentage. So for 2021 and even 2018, first semester, the average shortfall of the poor from the poverty threshold is 27%. So the average shortfall of a five-member family or five-member families was 3,262 from the poverty line. So their average income, bale, nung poor people is you subtract this. So roughly almost 9,000, 8,800 yung kanilang incomes compared to the poverty line. So it's good, no? It's actually it adds an element kasi for programming purposes, no? For example, yung conditional cash transfers. No? Government, for example, can say na ganito pala kalayo yung incomes ng people. So I can design, let's say, cash transfers, the value of cash transfers, or some other thing, no? So to at least now I know that ito yung shortfall. Maybe how can I plug that gap, and what size do I have to plug? How big yung value? So that's important. No? I find this measure very useful. The two other measures, poverty gap and squared poverty gap, for me, to be honest with you guys, not so much. But I want to teach this to you because international groups also measure these things. Just for your additional information. So remember this, no? We're gonna use practically the same formula but changing just certain variables to come up with the poverty gap and the squared poverty gap or severity of poverty. So remember again, you're taking the shortfall of all, each family shortfall, you're adding them up and dividing it by the total number of poor families to get the average. So itong Q, that is the number of families below the poverty threshold. Now the poverty gap, instead of Q, instead of the number of families below the poverty threshold, it's now N. It's the total number of people or families. But it's the same thing. This one is the same. So what this means is you are measuring the average shortfall now of the entire population as compared to the poverty threshold. Kasi dinidivide mo yung shortfall of the poor not just to the poor population but to the entire population. That's why it's obviously smaller. Kasi those who use this argue that it's good, not just to see how far the incomes of the poor are to the threshold on average, pero as a country, include the non-poor also. So the non-poor, obviously, their shortfall is 0. So you're basically just comparing the shortfall of the poor to the entire country, which is obviously smaller. Pero I don't find this as useful as the income gap kasi ito talagang is the average shortfall of the poor. Ito of the country. Diba? Yung denominator makes the total number of families. Dito, denominator makes the number of families below the poverty threshold. If this is too overwhelming for you, I think I'm trying to explain it in simple terms. It's on Canvas. Again, I expect most of your learning should be on Canvas. This is just a summary, supposed to serve as a summary. So for 2021, it was 4.9% of the threshold. So sabihin natin 5% of this, which is mga 250 pesos compared to the 12,082. Sorry. 600 pesos. All right. And the last one, no, it's the same as the poverty gap, but you square, no, you square, sorry, you square the shortfall. So you, again, it's still divided by the total number of families, and not just the poor ones, but all, poor and non-poor. Pero here, you're getting the shortfall of each family, aggregating that, poor family, and squaring it. Now, they call it the severity of poverty. Kasi daw, it's not often used. No, I don't use it myself. I don't think it's super useful. No, but their argument is it's supposed to measure how severe it is because you put more weight on the shortfall of the poor, no? Before you divide it by the total number of families. So, parang, di ba, for us, for you guys, sa classes nyo, no, merong courses na 5 units versus 3 units, greater weight. Ito, you're putting more weight on the shortfall before you divide it by the number. So that's what they're saying. It's supposed to measure the severity. So for 2021, it's 1.9%. But again, I don't think it's that useful. So if you're gonna use any of the FGT measures, use this, the income gap. That's useful. All right, let me know lang if you have questions. Another debate in terms of monetary measures, no, is should we use income or expenditure? Consumption / expenditure, those are interchangeable terms, no, in poverty statistics. No? That's the question. Should we use income or consumption? Matagal na debate to. It hasn't been resolved yet, no, in the world of poverty statisticians. When I was in the technical committee, no, people were advocating, no, let's switch na. Wag na income. Let's just measure poverty in terms of consumption. So why are other people saying consumption is a better measure, no, of well-being, no, or ill-being? Poverty naman is ill-being. So you have the concept of consumption smoothing. The problem with income, no, when we discuss consumption smoothing, the problem with income, no, it's not necessarily constant. Your parents, no, most of your parents would likely be employees for, let's say, corporations. No? So they get fixed salary every 15, 30, may bonus, ganun. So it's predictable. It's kind of constant. The problem is that's not true for many, or I would argue most Filipinos. No? Especially farmers, for example, or yung mga gig economy. Ayan, uso na ngayon with Grab, with Lalamove, with Food Panda. Gig economy, it's seasonal, so it's not constant. Consumption, on the other hand, they're saying, no, it's fairly constant kasi you need to fairly, no, hindi ko, of course there are peaks and valleys as well, no, pero minor compared to income fluctuations. You need to feed your family, you need to buy things, you need to for school, etc., etc. So ito yon. And that's the concept of consumption smoothing. So again, income is, di ba, ano yan, it can be seasonal. No? So ito, let's go to the concept of consumption smoothing. Consumption smoothing lang naman means people will tend to smoothen out their consumption, meaning constant yun. No? Because they need basic needs constantly. So what ends up happening, consumption is fairly smooth, fairly constant. Your income may not. So what happens is, kulang ka, then you borrow money. Once you have money, then you pay it off, and then you have savings, and then the dry season comes up again, no harvest, for example, for farmers, the income drops, then you have to borrow again, ganun. Pero consumption, no, it's kind of smooth, no? People try their best to either borrow or do anything just to sustain consumption. Consumption is relatively constant. So ako, even personally, no, I subscribe to that philosophy. It might be a better indicator because it's more it's a more constant snapshot of well-being. But yeah, wala. We're still using income. It's still okay. But in terms of superiority as a measure, no, people have been saying that it's a better metric, consumption. We'll see. Who knows? No, in the future, no, we might switch to expenditure. No, what people buy or families buy on a regular basis rather than what they earn. Pero yun na, the thresholds can still be the same. Diba? The food, ganun pa rin. It could still be the same methodology to get the threshold. Pero yung comparison lang can be consumption rather than it. There's a Freakonomics article on Canvas which gives a good flavor, no? Gives illustration on the difference, no? And the superiority of consumption. All right, another concept when talking about poverty, no, is self-rated poverty. This is very popular. I'm sure all of you have seen this on the news every quarter, SWS at least before, no? Now kasi intermittent na yung SWS results, but every quarter they measure this. I provided figures, no, that are pre-pandemic kasi of course the pandemic it went down. So what do you guys think of this? What do you guys think? I got one pala na during the height of the pandemic. What do you think about self-rated poverty measures? Good, bad, junk? What do you guys think?
Sir, I think
Go ahead.
it's a bit inaccurate to an extent na what I'm thinking of is some people think they're poor because wala na silang savings kasi masyado silang magastos on certain stuff that they don't need. That's the part that I think is inaccurate. So parang nagkakaroon sila ng lifestyle inflation na they kind of spend on things that are not really necessary and they end up having no savings and they feel poor because of that.
Yeah, so you hit it on the head, no? It's self-reporting. So the bias is great. No? There is no rigorous methodology. No? Basically, the interviewer asks you, do you think you're poor or not? Do you consider yourself poor or not? Yes or no? So no methodology, no menus, etc., etc. So you would expect, no, the self-rated poverty measures will be higher. No? Ito, almost double, no? Because of self-reporting. And you're absolutely correct, no? It's biased sometimes. Even if I am technically not poor, no, I might feel I am poor if, let's say, my neighbors are rich, or I'm magastos, as you said, no. I spend my money, so parang even if I'm earning ₱1,000,000 pala a month, I'm poor because my neighbor has 10 cars. Yung ganun, di ba? It's very subjective. But you know, it is also useful because it's, well, one is it's more frequent quarterly. And it's good for pulse checking because it follows the national trends. No? You would expect, for example, that self-rated poverty will go up if there's a national crisis or if there's a crisis somewhere in a major part of the country. Pandemic, no? Sky high, no? So it's good for pulse checking kasi the government kasi, people, you know, they're experiencing poverty, whether that's perceived or real, no? It's still important kasi it's good, no, to see what they're thinking and feeling. So that's self-rated poverty. I wanted to include that because that's also important. No? Yeah. All right. Now moving to inequality. No? Inequality is the twin sister or brother of poverty. No? Whenever we discuss poverty, no, you have to discuss inequality as well. That's very important. So inequality around the world, and I'm sure most of you remember this from your Dev Econ class. No? Inequality is largely measured by what you call the Gini coefficient. Basically, you don't need to understand this, no? But basically, it's derived from the Lorentz curve. You can Google if you want to really understand how it was derived. No? So it's derived from what we call the Lorentz curve. The measure is basically from 0 to 1. 0 if it's perfectly equal, meaning everyone has the same income. If it's 1, no, so it's a decimal point. No? If it's 1, it's most unequal, meaning only one person or one family owns 99% of the wealth. So extremes. So obviously, all countries are somewhere in between. The Philippines, we've been averaging for the last decades, plural, decades, mga 0.4 something. Naglalaro lang. No? Never less than 0.3. So the lower, the better. Diba? The more equal. The higher, the worse off. We have the highest Gini coefficient in Southeast Asia. Mind you. You go to the Nordic countries, mga 0.29, 0.3 lang. Gano'n. Because they're more equal. They have a strong middle class. Tayo, no. Highly, highly unequal. Now, no, so we've been talking about 3 important concepts, no, since the start of this course. Economic growth, GDP, for example, no, poverty, and inequality. Now let's explore the interrelationships, no, among the 3 concepts. No. To be precise, no, what is the relationship, or how does economic growth affect poverty when there is high or low inequality? Sige nga, anyone? What is the interrelationship based on what you've read or based on what you're thinking right now? No? How does economic growth affect poverty? No? And what about inequality? Is that a factor as well? Anyone wanna try? Sige lang, okay lang. All right. So there's 2 directions here. And there's a very good video by Dr. Martin Raballon. Raballon is one of the most well-respected poverty economists around the world. And in fact, no, he had good words for our methodology, for our poverty estimation methodology. And this has been proven, no, in 2000, no, and this is like gospel truth, no, in the poverty world, no, poverty estimation world. For all countries, no, for each country, no, the effect of economic growth, ito na muna, no, economic growth, in terms of poverty reduction is good, no? When you keep growing the pie, no, it's good, no? You would expect that poverty will get reduced, no? Kasi the more economic activity that you have, the more opportunities there are for the poor, no, to earn incomes. Okay, yun. The issue here now is if you throw in the factor of inequality, no, you now have the concept of elasticity. You know the concept of elasticity, diba? It's the responsiveness lang naman. So the question is, so how can inequality impact the effect of good economic growth to poverty? So what they're saying, and this is proven by data, no, in general, economic growth is good for poverty reduction. But the speed to which poverty is reduced, no, by superior economic growth rates, no, is influenced, significantly influenced by inequality. No? The more equal countries, no, the more egalitarian countries, no, in the more egalitarian countries, you would expect that, you know, if you have superior economic growth, the poverty reduction will improve a lot. No? But if a country is highly unequal, no, it has a more muted effect. Even if the pie gets bigger, kasi the distribution mechanisms, no, are not great. No? So it doesn't mean additional benefits accrue to the poor. No? The rich can get richer with crumbs going to the poor. No? So economic growth, yes, will have an impact on poverty reduction. Yes. But if you want poverty reduction to be reduced as a result of higher economic growth, no, it's better if the 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 country is more equal, no, in terms of income. So that's an important interrelationship among the three variables. No? Economic growth, as we keep on saying, is good, no, but it's not the only important factor. Solving inequality is also an important thing. Now let's try to do it the other direction. Kasi kanina we were exploring what is the effect of good economic growth to poverty reduction. Let's do it in reverse now. Now, what is the effect of poverty on economic growth? Or is there? No? Go ahead, Mark.
Sir, for example, I think this was discussed in the econ. For example, in education, when the poor are given more opportunity for education, they have the ability to be more skilled and to be more trained for them to participate in the labor market. And then being more productive in the labor market can have a huge potential for them to earn more income in the future. So if we give them the opportunity for education, then it sort of creates a cycle that they can escape poverty essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So it goes both ways, no? So if the poor are given opportunities and you're addressing inequality of opportunities, no, not only do they reduce their own poverty, but they also contribute more significantly to economic growth. Kasi di ba, the more educated you are, the more you can contribute to society. So both ways, no, inequality, if you're able to address it and improve it, the poor can either contribute more to the economy, and the economy, the benefits of economic growth translates much better to poverty reduction. So it goes both ways. And you go, Mark, thank you for that. No, you go to my next point. How do you make society more equal? You equalize opportunities such as education. Hindi tayo communist saying na lahat tayo same incomes. No. That's not sustainable. No? You equalize and let people decide their own destiny, their own career paths. No? But you give them the tools that would enable them. No? So we will explore this more in the capabilities approach next week. No? So you give them the tools, the enabling skills, no, opportunities for them to actually be the ones, no, to solve their own poverty. So thanks for that. Okay, just let me know if you have questions. No? I'm throwing, sorry if this is info overload, and I think some of the concepts naman, no, are just a review. No? Hopefully, it's not all repetition. No? Hopefully, you're getting new information in this lecture. The last thing I wanted to talk about, and this has been more pronounced and more relevant in my opinion, no, in the pandemic, is the concept of vulnerability. This was actually sort of invented, at least in the Philippines. So this concept was really explored by Dr. Celia Reyes again. So Dr. Celia Reyes is one of my favorite economists. No? I know her personally. She's really good stuff. Siya mabait pa. So she distinguishes between two types of poverty. One is chronic poverty. So it's like you're generally poor, no? Most of the time. Talagang hirap ka, no? You've been trying for so many years and you're not earning enough lang. You're not earning enough to meet your basic needs. That's chronic. Parang disease, no? Chronic siya. Whereas transient is, it can be temporary. No? Mostly it refers to those people who are, for example, near the poverty line. Remember, di ba, we have the lines earlier. No? There are people or families who have incomes just above. No? So those people are at risk of falling in poverty, or sometimes buenas, no, they fall out of poverty. No? but it's not constant. No? They sometimes are in, sometimes are out. Periodic. Either poor most of the time or non-poor most of the time. So we call those people vulnerable. No? Because erratic eh. They're not able to sustain their basic needs, no, all the time, which is what we want to avoid. So especially those people, no, earning incomes near the poverty line, just above, those are what we consider vulnerable. Kasi just a rainy day, may shocks, no. As economists, no, we use the term shocks as a catch-all for both man-made and natural disasters, pandemics, for example, typhoons. No? So yung mga near poor lang, no, when a typhoon strikes, they fall into poverty. Kasi, so ito, there are studies. No? Too bad, no? The last study was done mga 2011 pa. No? So the past decade, wala masyado. So, you know, they were following some of the families interviewed in FIES. No? There are, no, iba-iba. Eh, no? There are those who are income poor. Sometimes, no, they were falling within poverty. Sometimes they are out of poverty. No, so yun, vulnerable. So that's an important concept because I think, no, many, especially during the pandemic, no, faced transient poverty because they were vulnerable. Either they only had semi-skilled or unskilled skills, wala silang ibang racket, they were engaged in, you know, in the in the experience economy, tour operators, for example, they didn't have safety nets. No? So I'm sure many of those almost 3 million Filipinos that slid into poverty were non-poor before, no? But they were near poor. That's why they were vulnerable. So the concept of vulnerability, please explore more, no, in your Canvas course. It's very important, especially now. No, it's more relevant. So this is the last slide. No? So in terms of vulnerability, no, so Dr. Celia Reyes was exploring what are the determinants, no? What makes one vulnerable? There are three basic things, no, that they found out through regression analysis, econometric analysis. So one, if you're living in the rural areas, especially if it's farm related, because again, seasonal yung income, you're the mercy of typhoons, for example, no. If there's peace and order problem, no, if you're living in Muslim Mindanao, ARM or BARM now, and basic sectors, if you're a member of a basic sector. Basic sectors refer to groups that are officially, there's a law that actually designated 12, I think 12 groups, no, that are marginalized. These include farmers, urban poor, fisher folk, migrant workers, indigenous peoples, etc., informal sector, etc., etc. So you can Google that, no, for the complete distance. Obviously, they are in precarious occupations, therefore, they are vulnerable. So the important thing when you're discussing, in terms of interventions, the important thing when you're discussing or thinking about vulnerability is the importance of safety nets. For a rainy day, resilience mechanisms, insurance, no, social security, unemployment insurance, etc., etc. In other countries, no, they have unemployment insurance. So tayo wala, no. Some are advocating for that. Although, again, where do we get the money? So kulang daw yung SSS, no. But yeah, SSS, for example, GSIS, you can borrow money for rainy days. So safety nets are important. So think about that when you're down the road, no, in the future when you're in development work, for example, you're thinking of interventions. That's very important. So the last thing I want to cover is based on their research, Dr. Celia Reyes and her co-authors, co-researchers, how do you reduce both? No, so it's not enough to reduce vulnerability, but also chronic poverty. Of course, you want to address persistent poverty. So 5 things. No? College education increases the livelihood that you will not be poor, no? Which is good. No? Lower dependency burden, more kids or more elderly in the household, that increases the livelihood of of being poor. No? Kunyari 10 kids versus 2 kids. No? Asset ownership, no? If you have savings, you have things that you can sell, for example, quickly, liquid. Employment, obviously, no? If you have regular, especially regular employment. And for especially in Mindanao, no? Or in rural areas where there's NPA or some insurgency, absence of armed. So I just wanted to include this discussion, no, on Canvas and in this lecture because it's important, especially during the pandemic, because many have become vulnerable. Remember, 3 million Filipinos have slid to poverty in just 3 years' time, destroying, there's backsliding in terms of the country's gains in poverty reduction. So we'll save the non-income poverty discussion next week because this might have been info overload na. And I promise you guys, no, roughly naman each session that we have, no, I'll only use up an hour and a half to summarize what you are supposed to be learning or have learned on Canvas. All right, any questions? I hope this has been at least interesting and useful for you. Francis, go ahead.
Sir, referring back, sir, to income versus consumption, because we've discussed earlier that consumption is usually constant or fairly smooth, sir. Kasama ba po sa na-account po dun sa pagka-fairly smooth po nun yung inflation or the possibility of price increases?
Yeah, inflation is accounted for when you construct the poverty lines, di ba? So it's gonna be the same methodology rin, no? So you i-construct din nila ng food line, which by every year nagbabago yon, and then the non-food, no? And then they'll compare the expenditure. So ganun pa rin. So they take into account inflation when they construct the poverty lines. For both income and consumption.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions, guys? Okay, so again, please, if you're having difficulty finding a partner for the pair or dyad assignment, answer the survey so I can introduce all of you, to one another. Those who are having a hard time finding a pair. Remember, the deadline is March 5. For your classmates, in case you know someone who's interested to listen to this lecture but was not able to attend, I will post the recording tonight or tomorrow. Right? Okay. No more questions, huh? Thank you, guys. Have a good dinner and have a good evening and a good night. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
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 Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
sir.